Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 2 of advanced JavaScript. Today we're going to learn all about detection in your code. So let's start with an overview. Today we're going to introduce the distance function and we're going to create a cookie counter. So some review questions. We have 3 review questions. The first one being how many properties can an object have? Feel free to pause the video for any of these questions. And the answer would be infinite. You can have as many properties as you want and there is no limit. The second question, what is dot notation? The syntax for dot notation is this. So it's the object name dot the property of the object. And third, how do you change a property? You would do the object name dot property name, which equals the new value of that property. This is similar concept-wise to changing the value of a variable. Now the goal for day 2 is to increment the amount of cookies you have when you click. Here is a demo. So as you can see, there are 0 cookies as of now, but if I click the cookie, it will go up every time I click it. It's going to increment by 1. As you can see, I'm clicking only once. I'm going to click one more time and it goes up to 11 cookies. So as it says, you have 1 cookie per click. So you should try and have something like this down. And moving on. Okay, now moving on, we have the distance function. So the distance function is often denoted as dist and then parentheses. So the distance function returns the distance between 2 points given as parameters. Now the parameters would be 4 data points for 2 coordinate pairs, meaning 2 points. So it would be x1, y1, x2, and y2. Now if you look at the graph, there is a cursor at the point 200, 400, and there is a circular dot at 200, 200. Now the distance, if we run the distance function, then we would put 200, 200, mouse x, mouse y, because mouse x, mouse y gives the coordinate of the mouse. So we would run the distance function, we would get an answer of 200 since there is a distance of 200 units between the two. The cursor is 200 units below this dot, essentially. Now we have the isTouching function. Now imagine your cookies is a circle, like a perfect circle, and you want to check if the cursor is inside the bounds of that circle. Now the distance function is helpful here because it returns the distance between the 2 given points. Now the 2 given points would be the mouse x, mouse y, where your cursor is, and the center of the circle, which is just the coordinates of your cookie. So if the distance is less than or equal to the radius of the cookie, then we know that the cursor is on the cookie. So you can say that it's touching the cookie because the cursor is on top of it. Now if the distance is greater, then you know that the cursor is outside the cookie. And if you click, it should not increment anything because you are not in the cookie or on the cookie. Now here's an example of the isTouching function. you can create an isTouching function inside of your cookie object. As you can see here, you're also returning the distance. Um, so in this blue rectangle, in the distance would be your 4 parameters. And this is going to return true if the distance is less than the cookie radius, and false if it is greater. Now step 4 would be to count the cookies. The goal in the cookie clicker is to get as many cookies as you can, but you can only know how many, you can only get the most cookies if you know how many cookies you have. So you would create a variable to store the number of cookies you have. You would increment a variable every time you click, and use isTouching to make sure that the cookie is being clicked and not somewhere else. Now it shouldn't be like you click anywhere on the screen and the cookie increments by 1 when you clearly did not even touch the cookie. Then it should also show your score somewhere on the screen, so you should create a counter. Then we introduce a new function, the millisecond function. The millisecond function is often denoted as MILLIS and parentheses. It returns the current number of milliseconds that has passed since the program has started, and it is constantly being updated. Now, just to make sure, a millisecond is 1,000th of a second, meaning there are 1,000 milliseconds in every second. Just like how a millimeter is 1,000th of a meter. So it's just that prefix milli. Now to create timed effects, you can create another variable, time since last update, for example. It doesn't have to be called that, but that's just what we wrote here. And you can measure the difference between the two inside the draw function. Now if you look at the code, in case you're curious, the number 2000 is because there are 2000 milliseconds in a second. So it's basically gonna reset the variable and update every 2 seconds. Now for step 5, you would add a cookie per second. You would use milliseconds to add cookies.cps. CPS would be cookies per second. And you would add cookies.cps every second to your total cookie count. Now you would increment this by probably 1. Well, basically the whole point is it's supposed to increment. It doesn't matter how much, but you should increment it every second. So by doing so, in this case, you see 2000. If you do cookies per second, it should be 1000 because you are running it every second. So there should be 1000 milliseconds instead of 2000. Then you have step 6 is just display the cookies per second and the cookies per click. So CPS and cookies per second, and CPC, which is cookies per click. So it should just show the text counter in the corner of the screen. Now it's very important, you should save your project. We are going to continually work on the cookie clicker project throughout this course. So press the blue save button on Khan Academy so that you don't have to start again in lesson 3. Now, before we see the answers, let's do some recap questions. So, question 1, what are the parameters of the distance function? You can pause the video to answer all of these. The parameters would be x1, y1, x2, and y2, which are just the coordinates of the 2 points. It's finding the distance between. Now, how do you call the isTouching function? It's just this basic syntax. In JavaScript, it's called camel case, meaning the first word has no capital letters, while the second word is capitalized, as you can see here. Now, what does the millisecond function return? It returns the number of milliseconds since the program has started. It's really helpful for timing effects or certain features like in our Cookie Clicker project. Now we can look at the answer. Now you can see the code here. I can run through the code. So you can see we have created the millisecond function on line 8. Then we are creating objects with properties for the cookie. So you can see X, Y, this is where it's positioned. You have the size, which is given a number 1. Now is touching is that function is also within the object, and it's looking at the X and Y properties of this cookie and comparing that with the coordinates of mouse X and mouse Y. Now here's the draw function. So this fill is just RGB values to set the color of different parts of the cookies. Now this is a cool animation. If the mouse is pressed, like if you click on the cookie, the size, which was originally set as 1 in the object, if you remember, way up here, size is 1, is now 0.95. So it's 95% of what it was originally. So now it's smaller. So you get a nice, like kind of like a button click animation when you click on the cookie. If you notice, it gets slightly smaller every click. And then once you finish clicking, it's going to go back to its original size. Now this fill 000 is just the color black, meaning that you're going to have black text for the labels, cookies, cookies per click, and cookies per second. And then these strings are concatenated, meaning the string plus the variables are kind of placed together. Hence, you have cookies and the number of cookies and cookies per click and the number of cookies per click, etc. in the corner. So you actually have a working counter, which is updated as it's a variable. Now it can automatically add cookies per second. And like I said earlier, the time since last auto update is greater than 1000. So 1000 because it needs it updates every second, which is 1000 milliseconds. And finally, this is just to check if the cookie was clicked. So if is touching returns true, then it's gonna increase the cookies per click. Now so now I've seen the answer, we are pretty much done. Yeah. Yeah, congratulations, you finished lesson 2. Stay tuned for lesson 3. Thank you.